Hi. Okay, thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. How is everyone this morning? I hope you had a good rest the day before. Thank you so much for coming to our talk. This is called the Next Generation Climate Education and Youth Stakeholdership Envisioned by Youth Leaders from the UN, G7, and National Youth Delegates. So we have very lovely speakers joined at our discussion here at the Japan Pavilion. For those of you who will be joining us from online, if you'd like to listen to this discussion all in Japanese, please use the Zoom's interpretation tool, as you can see over here. So when you access the Zoom, you'll find the globe button. Please check on that and choose the language you would like to listen to accordingly. All right, I think we all got that smooth. Perfect. And I think I'd like to move on to the next slide. Oh, Haruki, do you mind pushing the next slide for me? I think the clicker is not moving. Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. So this is the agenda we have today. We'll have our opening remarks by me, and then we'll move on to the speaker's introduction, 1 minute each. And then we'll have a panel discussion on climate education, as well as the youth advisory system that everyone wants to see to be changed up. And we'll be followed by a Q&A session from the audience. Hopefully we'll have time for that. And then we'll be closing this session at 11:45. Right. Thank you so much. All right, so first and foremost, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to the Ministry of Environment of Japan for affording us the privilege to host this seminar. This event really serves as a crucial platform for supporting the youth in becoming a formidable driving force towards achieving carbon neutrality a lot more faster. And given Japan's standing as the fifth largest global CO2 emitter, we recognize that the pivotal role we play as Japanese is growing as we see by day. And especially youth should be positioned at the forefront of this endeavor. So not only should we bring Japanese youth together, but also global youth. And hence we have these panel members today. Just a little bit about myself before we go into the introduction of the speakers. So my name is Mana, and I'm the Swiss director in Japan. And may we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So a little bit about Switch. We're an NPO working on living within the planetary boundary. We have mainly three focuses we're working on. First is the youth participation as a stakeholder within corporations and also politics. Secondly is to increase education on sustainability. And thirdly, our increasing Japanese contribution to MAPA, especially because we are fifth as the global CO2 emitter. Thank you. Next slide, please. And so just a little bit about what Switch is working on. Mainly we have talk sessions with sustainability leaders within the field in Japan. We've had discussions with Volvo, Tetra Pak, and a lot of Japanese corporates like Hitachi and Meiji who are joining in to share their methodologies on sustainability to youth. And also we have a lot of different other climate education programs, which will be next that we'll be discussing. Oops, sorry. So in terms of climate education, we believe that we really need to increase the amount of capacity building in the Japanese sphere. And in order to do so, we're trying to reach to 3.5% of our population by 2025 in the expo. And by doing so, we'll be able to harness a larger amount of youth who believe that sustainability should be at the core of their jobs and their livelihood. So how do we do that? We're working with UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program. They actually have a textbook called Geo6 for Youth, which was a toolkit that was made for 18 to 25-year-olds. We've translated all of this into Japanese and created an e-learning site with professionals or the most top-level academics in Japan. And we've been working on the climate education sphere for the last year in order to not just create this toolkit, but also provide specialized learnings on mobility and other sectors to be represented or to be taught, to the younger generation. So climate education, we've just started. And then in terms of youth stakeholdership, we're working with Sapporo Ward, which is a city up north in Japan, to create the system of youth, universities, companies, and local governments coming together and working towards a sustainable city-making processes. So this is a pilot program we are operating right now. And based on the discussions we had, which started from the G7 this year, we've been tremendously successful in bringing together not only the Sapporo city, but also Hokkaido Prefecture, which is the bigger province of the Sapporo city, as well as the Ministry of Environment to join the dialogue in implementing youth voices. And based on these talks, we were able to choose one action to be implemented, which is to change the souvenir industry to become more sustainable. So that's kind of the process that we've been working on. So the reason why I introduced myself is that we see there is a change in Japan to bring these youth voices within the local government sphere and also the education sphere. How do we make sure to bring the youth at the center of the dialogue? But I believe that in order to fasten this pace, we can really learn from each other, especially from the panelists here today. And how can we co-collaborate not only within Japan, but across generations and also across the sea. So I think this is why we're here. So without further ado, I would like to introduce all the other speakers, not just only me, but the lovely panelists we have right over here. And the first person I would like to introduce will be, Haruki, do you mind pushing the slide for me? Thank you. Yes, so first off, we have Akari Horioka. If you could introduce yourself in a minute and why did you start this climate action as your personal story?
Okay. Hi, I'm Akari Horioka. I'm from Japan and I'm part of NGO called Climate Youth Japan. I'm also from University of Tokyo. And what I do now is COP28 delegates and COP18 delegates. And I'm doing my projects for EduCOI 2024. And why I'm in this field is it's because when I was in junior high school, I felt the disparity of education, which is rural area to cities, because I'm from rural area. So I should change this situation to include every region in Japan. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. So this is just a picture from your action.
Yeah. I participated in EduCOI Japan.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think next we have Axel.
Hello, my name is Axel Eriksson from Sweden. I am one of 2 Swedish youth delegates, which means that I'm part of the Swedish negotiator delegation, but I don't negotiate. I represent youth there to make sure that those voices are actually heard when the negotiators speak. The reason I'm in this role is because in the country where I grew up, sure, I got a lot of information about that climate change is happening. But then I understood how large the crisis actually is, and that I, as a young person, actually can make a difference by being involved in this kind of role, coming to COPs and making my voice heard for those who might not be able to come here. But aside from this role, I'm also involved in the UN Biodiversity Convention and on the national level in environmental advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Axel. And then next off, we have Aurora, who's sitting right next to me.
Yep. Hi everyone. Thank you for the invitation and hosting this session today. So quickly, well, I started to be passionate about nature and environmental protection when I was quite young. I think it was because my parents were bringing me a lot for hiking in the Italian mountains. And so then I decided to study how to protect the environment, pursuing a degree in environmental engineering. Lately, I got closer to the policy world by starting to volunteer with the Italian Climate Network, attending COP26, COP27, and reporting in Italian what was happening at the negotiation table. I've had different policy involvement as a youth representative. I was part of the G7 youth delegation as Italy head delegate and delegate for sustainability. Also, I took part at the Youth for Climate initiative in New York and Rome this year. And I've also, over the last year, dedicated myself to education, delivering workshops. I think overall, through also the Italy Arena I Act Peer Educator, I managed to train around 200 youth over the last year. And I think that's it.
All right, thank you so much, Aura. And then next off, we have Javanik.
I guess that's me. Hi, everybody. I'm Giovanni Henry from the Caribbean island of St. Lucia. Of course, part of the Alliance of Small Island States Fellowship and a member of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate. Of course, coming from a small island state, of course, I would have to commend Japan's contribution. I would pledge to the Loss and Damage Fund. Of course, you know, for us as small islands, it is key. And coming from a small island state, why sort of I got involved into this space was actually from a traumatic experience 10 years ago on the eve of Christmas, where my small 238 square mile island got devastated by a tropical storm on the eve of Christmas. And from there, I got involved in engaging with other young people to see how we can drive a solution-oriented era. And then, of course, to accompany this grassroots work influencing at the policy level. Of us, it's important to strike the balance between grassroots and ensure we have the accompanying policies to drive it. So, pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Javanik. And lastly, we have Nisreen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nasreen Al-Saim. I am from Sudan. I was the former chair of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. And I've been doing climate activism for 11 years now, and this is my 10th COP. I know, I sound very old, but I'm not. Climate education is really important because if you don't understand the problem itself, you will not be able to solve it. And this is how we started to communicating to different people and different population about how important is climate change and how we should communicate it. And we'll talk more in the presentation that I will be giving later. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, all speakers. We're really excited to have you all in this panel and have a really exciting talk. In terms of how to contribute to this discussion, I understand that the speakers here are lovely, but we always love to ask what your opinions are from the audience, people who are in person, joining in person, and also online. So if you have any questions, feel free to put your questions on the Zoom chat. If you're joining online, we'll try to pick up your question via Zoom chat when we go into the panel discussion and Q&A. If you're joining in person, we'll ask you to raise your hands later and have your opinion spoken up. And other than that, you will be using this live polling toolkit called Mentimeter during the panel discussion. So if you could quickly scan the QR code here, we'll be using the Mentimeter later. So if you could keep that page open as we're talking, it'll be great. And for those who are joining us online, we'll put in the Mentimeter URL in the Zoom chat box, and you can access the Mentimeter from there as well. So I think I see a couple of people who are scanning right now. We'll just keep the page open for a bit more time. Perfect. Is everyone good with the QR code? Yeah, we're all good. Thank you. Okay, let's get moving. All right, thank you. Oh, you can keep it on the presentation slide for Canva. Haruki-san. Canva is fine. Thank you. Perfect. So let's move on to the panel discussion. The first topic we really want to pick up on is the climate education sphere. So as you know, the green transition will create thousands of jobs and the global green economy is worth $10 trillion. But alarmingly, approximately half of the 100 countries under review for the UNESCO failed to incorporate any mention of climate change into their national curriculum. So we realized that climate change isn't necessarily on the agenda for most nations at this point. And this disparity is particularly concerning given that 90% of surveyed primary and secondary teachers recognize the importance of teaching climate change, but they don't know how to teach about it because they aren't specialized in it. And however, less than 30% express readiness to tackle this critical subject. So they are really interested, but they don't know how. And the discrepancy between the acknowledged significance of climate education and the actual preparedness to it is noteworthy for the challenge that we need to discuss right now. And moreover, the impact of this educational gap, as we see, we have more people who have a good education background, understand what is the causation of climate change and how to tackle it. But how about the people who aren't in that top sphere? Are we just going to leave them behind? That shouldn't be the case. So we see this education gap is very profound. And considering that 75% of the people express genuine fear about their future in the face of climate change consequences, we need to prepare them. And how do we do that, especially amongst youth, but also how do we convey this message to people who are above our age and build their capacity building, because I think it's reskilling for most people. So I think I want to touch upon what is climate education from Nisreen as you have your presentation. And you can give us an overview of what climate education really means. So I think I want to move on to the next slide. Haruki-san. Thank you. Yes. All right, I'm just going to give you this clicker real quickly.
Thank you very much. So basically, I'm not going to really define climate education, but more or less I will talk about the process that climate education went through during the different COPs, and then maybe we can go back to the actual definition of climate education. So this is the content of my presentation. So at the beginning, I will talk about the timeline, and then the climate education in the MENA region, but also the world, and then the marginalized group. And I chose the MENA region because COP is hosted in Dubai this year, and last year it was in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. So it's a region that it's taking a lot of the climate sphere right now. Yeah. So the most important thing is don't believe anyone that tells you that climate education is a new topic. And I've been hearing a lot of people saying that this year is the first year where we have an education day. Not true. It is really not a new topic. And also we had a lot of education days before, but it's the first time we have an education pavilion. This is true. So the timeline. The story actually started from the beginning when the convention was agreed on and negotiated. So back in 1992, there was an article called Article 6. And Article 6 in the the convention, in the UNFCCC convention, is talking about education, training, and public awareness. So this is like really back on 1992, and it's talking about all of the ways, because education normally means the formal educations in schools, but in a lot of countries around the world we have a lot of school dropouts, for example, or people who cannot afford to go to school, or places where there's no schools in the first place. So now they're talking about education, training, and public awareness, because everyone should at least know the basics of climate change in different formats. So you can basically design the content and then put it in different tools and different formats. The second progress was the Doha Work Program, when they said this is not enough, we really need to do more on education, training, and public awareness. And they actually gave more details on how COPs and different UN strategies should go about. And then last but not least, we have the Paris Agreement, which is Article 12 in the Paris Agreement, which is called ACE, Action for Climate Empowerment, where it have education, 6 pillars, like 6 important pillars. And guess what's the first? Education, and then of course public awareness, and then training, and then public participation, public access to information, and international cooperation. And exactly, I think these 6 elements are exactly what defines our panel for today, because we're talking about education, but not only the formal education, and it is somehow an international cooperation. But of course, the most important, we need to make everything public, specifically about climate change. So public participation, public awareness, and access to information. Then the education situation in the MENA and the world. In the world, only 53% of the global national education curriculums have just purely mentioned climate change, and it is very, very rare and very simple thing. It doesn't give adequate information. But regarding to the last report by UNESCO, only 30% out of 80 countries actually submitted climate change in their education budgets. Of course, in order to have a curriculum about education, you have to budget this curriculum. So if it's not in the budget, then the country is not really serious enough about putting climate change in the education. And only 38% of the countries have a low level or anything that mention climate education. And 63 countries have education plans, but the implementation is really rarely there. So almost 2% only had an implementation of these plans. Yes, there is a progress, however. So, for example, France, Korea, and Rwanda are countries that are doing quite progress. It's not perfect yet, but they are progressing in terms of climate education. So in the MENA region, only 5 countries submitted NDCs with climate education part in it. And none of these have climate education as compulsory. So it's still up to you to choose to learn about climate change or not. And of course, there's still not adequate resources to have climate education seriously part of the curriculum or different training systems. Next, please. Education for the marginalized group. So I think this is where it comes more shocking. So 16% of the global population are individuals with disabilities. And this means 1.3 billion people have disabilities. And in spite of that, the number is big. 1.3 billion is not something small. There is almost no educational materials about climate change for people with disabilities, almost zero. So there is, but I think it's 0.6 or 0.4, something very small. And almost zero Arabic speaker. And this is why I was talking about the MENA region, because now actually language is a huge barrier. And if you don't speak English, and of course, I think for Korea, it is the same. There is and for Japan, of course, I think there is a very small materials that talks about climate education in Japanese, and in Arabic is the same even. And only 3% of the climate education materials are for non-English speakers. And these numbers, in my perspective, are really shocking and needs to be reconsidered. How can we solve this problem? And I think the step one is to actually make the content, because if you made a content, then the content can be translated to different language. It can be communicated differently. We can use sign language, you can use Braille, you can use a lot of things, but you need to make the content first. And of course, the second thing is to have enough budgeting to not only have it inside of the curriculum, but also to be able to communicate it in different tools. Yes, and I will summarize my presentation with a call to action. We really need to take this serious because I've just shown you the timeline. It's not something new, but we are not progressing well. And addressing these gaps and moving forward is the only way that we can actually make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nasreen. So everyone, now you have an overview of what climate education history we've gone through. So this isn't necessarily a new topic, yet why don't we see a very big progress? And how can we actually bring this topic to the forefront now, especially since we do need green jobs, but necessarily we don't have the capacity building that is ready yet in any nation, as you can see. So how can we progress this climate education system? And I think we can learn a bit more from the Nordic countries, because we see the Nordic countries at the frontiers of actually creating these green systems. And so Axel, I feel like you've already been part of that system and you could share us some insight on that sphere as well.
I've basically grown up with it, so it's hard not to know anything about it. So first of all, I was very happy in the beginning, Mana, when you told about the increasing awareness in Japan that there seems to be a wish for more climate education. And I already know that there is this long-standing tradition of eco schools, which are more environmentally friendly, and also awareness raising about heating and cooling to make it less energy demanding, and so on. So I really hope that this trend continues. But as for the Nordic countries, there are, at least in Sweden, there has been a long-standing strategy of integrating climate across basically all subjects during elementary school and secondary school and so on, which I think is very helpful in the sense that it shows that climate is not only an issue for the natural sciences. It's not about the carbon in the air, it's about the people on the ground having to experience the impact. And therefore, that has to be taught in the social sciences as well. Climate has impacts on languages. If the environment around you disappears or changes, then that might affect your language. And this can also be taught. So I do think Sweden has taken a few steps in the right direction, but there's definitely more to be done in terms of really integrating climate across the scale, and also seeing environmental issues more broadly than just climate, because climate is very much tied to biodiversity loss or pollution. So those kinds of interlinkages should also be seen, which we as young people in the Nordics are very much calling for. But to return back to kind of good examples, I believe that the advances in climate education in Sweden and other Nordic countries is one of the aspects which has promoted a green entrepreneurship, where there are these initiatives like fossil fuel free steel, or just the general roadmap for Swedish industries to become for them to become fossil fuel free. There's something called the fossil fuel free initiative of Sweden, which gathers 21 different industries, all of them having a clear roadmap to getting there, to net zero, and getting rid of their dependence of fossil fuels. And finally, I would like to end by just stressing why do we actually need this climate education? Because I would say, since the climate crisis is so large, it might be one of the most existential crises we're facing, together with biodiversity loss and pollution. We really need every sector, every generation, everyone knowing about it. Because if we don't know about it, we can't act about it. And especially we as young people want to have a future that is possible for us to live the way we want in. And we want to contribute to that. So really, we need education for that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think you really highlighted the necessity, but also how the Nordic countries have been successful in educating their children to be more climate centric by teaching all curriculums to have climate change within their system. And now you see that generation that grew up and they're working and they're part of policy making, but also work in the private sphere, and they're making the change. But I want to throw to Jovanik, as you are a person who have already experienced the climate crisis 10 years ago, it's, Yuri felt it earlier on. What kind of climate education system do you feel like needs to be changed? And how can we make it so that it's youth-centric?
If I may, actually a few days ago, I actually met someone in Dubai, and he was telling me how his 4-year-old son is now asking him about when they go to shop, that they now wants to bring his little backpack, and they no longer want the plastic bags and so on. And we were talking about the same climate education concept, the fact that how children can actually really be the catalyst that can influence action at the home, and then on a larger scale. Now, why I would have said this in a sense whereby when we speak about climate education, it is important that the intervention starts at the early childhood level, and we do not leave it simply for the high school level. So back in my home country, one of the things we try to do is that pushing the overall policy change to incorporate within the high schools and primary schools can be quite difficult, maneuvering for governments and so on. So what we're now doing is that we're working with what they call the preschools and the sort of kindergarten, early childhood schools. And within there, we're integrating the aspects of sustainable living, the aspects of understanding about the climate, so that we're developing a cadre of children who then, when they go on to the primary and secondary level, are able to influence, their households and can influence their peers. Because I'm sure we know how children can really and truly, when one does something, in a practical space, the other will pick it up. So that is one of the key things which we try to incorporate. And one of the things which is what we try to do is that to link climate with other subject areas, I think like Axel was mentioning as well. Because to push, climate education course or so on, again, these take extensive efforts at the policy level. So right now what we're doing is trying to incorporate within existing curricula. So whether it be business, whether it be science or so on, and we're working with a few schools to see that where we have sort of not similar seminars, but sort of a guest lecturer approach whereby you provide them the information, but also with the children now tasked, we've taken up a project within the year so that they can actually demonstrate what they would have learned and how they're going to influence it. So it's key that one, we start at the sort of in the early childhood level, because that will create the sort of generational change which we really want, and not the old people like me trying to push it. So it's important that we start at that level, but also how we can incorporate within existing systems within the schools, and that can be key. And just one thing I need to touch about on the language thing, and it is such a key aspect as well, because I come from a rural community, and many people speak what they call a French Creole, and most of the content is in the formal education system is in English, and many children don't, so what we try to do now, while it's not perfect, we try to work with partners in developing learning material that can actually be useful. So for example, for COP last year, we worked with UNICEF in sort of developing children-friendly materials within the local language. Again, these are small steps, but when you really it's a step in the right direction, because we believe that children can only be the catalyst, and creating that snowball effect that will create the sort of generational change we need.
Thank you so much. So approaching the preschool actually makes an impact not just only in the long term, but for the parents and their grandparents as well. So I'm sure that it's a triple effect by teaching these younger gen. But I wanted to touch upon to Aurora, because I know that you've been working on youth-led action, and how do we enhance that participation in the education sphere. So if you could talk about that, that'll be great.
Yes, thank you. So before that, I want to touch upon a few points related to climate education that I've had experience with. The first one, to have effective climate education, I think for youth especially, it's important that the material we create is co-created with youth. And this is key, because we really need to see what are the needs of youth, because most of the time youth are the most aware of the topic of the climate change, of the environmental issues. So they really want to see, have the answer and see concrete examples. And I'm saying this because actually I was speaking in a school in France, delivering a workshop, and the questions I was receiving were very, very practical, very, very specific. And so that made me ask myself, okay, but I know they have climate education in their curricula. So maybe these curricula should be improved to really address the needs of youth by co-creating these programs together. Another thing I wanted to touch upon is about the importance also of in non-formal educations and of learning by doing. I think this is often undermined into the national curricula, but is a very effective process. There are studies confirming this. So this should not be undermined into national curricula. Last point, because I see a flag, a red flag. The time is running up. We also discussed a bit about okay, how can we actually bring on board this segment of the population which is less aware about the topic. And I want to bring an example. For example, during the G7 youth consultations and discussions with other G7 countries, which by the way, were not only G7 countries, it also included some observers countries such as Indonesia, India, etc. We were discussing about proposing the introduction of mandatory climate education, both for young people in schools, but also for adults and for businesses. So this should be something to take into account, that every manager, every leader should have really the basic knowledge to understand what is happening around us and what we should do to have a better impact.
Thank you so much. And I think we'll wrap up this climate education bit, but is there anything that Nisreen and Akari you want to add after listening to all the comments as well?
And hi, I'm from Japan. And what do you think about the Japanese climate awareness? Is it high or low? And because they are showing off high technologies over there, so you might think Japanese climate change awareness is high, so but it's not true. Can you show the data? And
Haruki, do you mind doing the Canva as well? Thank you.
actually, climate change awareness in Japan is so low. And I think it's a problem of climate change education in Japan, because climate change education in Japan only focuses on the importance of CO2 decreasing, and it is not inclusive because, as you said, it's, oh yeah, this is data, because it's Japan, and I worry about climate change. Oh, so thank you. I worry about climate change threatening people on the planet. Is highly concerned or very extremely concerned number of people answered by Japanese people is really low. So I think it's a problem of Japanese climate change education. And climate change education in Japan only focuses on CO2 emission or not include human rights or food security and flood damage, like overall problems. So we should change this problem, and we recommended our government to have digital-based contents used by Japanese, all for Japanese schools, companies, all generations. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And Nasreen, would you like to add any points regarding the climate education bit? Who should we move in terms of teach climate education, and how can we progress a bit more further?
I think it's very important to highlight that it takes us normally a very long time to take an action and address something. And I think with climate education, I hope it's not the case, because we will reach a point where we will have to bring everyone from the street and try to push the informations inside of their heads because it's happening and it's happening very fast. And if we cannot reduce the emissions significantly, and at least we can make people prepared for what will happen and make them aware of what's happening and how to adapt with it.
Of course, thank you so much. So I think all in all, from discussing with all the speakers, we can realize that we do need to start this education process when they're very young, so starting from preschool. But also the people who are the change makers right now are not necessarily preschoolers. But how do we make sure that those people do change? I think Aurora gave us a really good example as to youth being at the center of understanding, creating a list up of what kind of education we need. And we can also share that to the corporate sphere because that is the fundamentals that we youth believe is needed and should be also shared towards the private sector and also people who are above us. So not necessarily becoming an education that's only to reduce CO2 emissions, as Akari said, but it should go beyond that as well. So our next topic is regarding youth stakeholdership. Thank you so much. And I think we discussed the necessity for climate education to be brought at the forefront. And Nasreen really depicted the importance of this dialogue to be put at the center, despite this being, a topic that has already been discussed for many years. But why hasn't it been pushed forward? One thing that we could really address is to bring the youth voices a lot more efficiently within local governments, as well as the UN level, G7, G20, as well as the private sphere, in order to bring this climate education to be at the forefront. So how do we do that? I think most people don't necessarily understand what a youth advisory system is. So if I could ask Nasreen to give us an introduction of how the UN Youth Advisory works, and also the nation level towards Axel, that'll be great as well.
Actually, as a person who already did it, I would like to give the space for Javi.
Yes, that'll be lovely. You just
Yes.
earlier on.
But if you have anything you can't say, give the mic to me, I will say it.
It'll be a good teamwork.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, we took the baton from Nazreen and her team at the time when the UN Secretary General recognized the need to have young people at the heart of the multilateral process. Because, of course, we'd understand that achieving the Sustainable Development Agenda, we know that we as young people can play a critical role. So, of course, they set up the first Youth Advisory Group, comprising of 7 young people from around the world. And now we're in the second cohort. And what is key within this youth advisory system is that it ensures there's representation from a wide cross-section of young people. And I think that is key in developing any youth advisory system, that you have indigenous groups present, you have a gender balance, you have from small islands and developed, undeveloped countries involved. So therefore, the whatever advice is provided to the Secretary General to accelerate this climate agenda is holistic, and it's not skewed or biased towards one sector or one region. So that is a key element in developing any youth advisory system, that it must be a wider cross-section. And an added advantage of that is that it provides the gateway for young people who oftentimes perhaps would not have been able to connect or to be able to reach, certain systems. So for example, having, let's say, a member from the Pacific, perhaps maybe a Pacific youth may be a bit more hesitant to reach out to, let's say, a representative from Europe, if you get where I'm coming from, because you don't connect on similar issues. But then having, for example, a representative from Pacific or the Caribbean, Latin America, it facilitates that connect, because then you can connect with groups within the various communities to bridge that gap between policy and action. And I think that is a core element of it. And I'm not mindful of time, so maybe I'll stop it.
Would you like to add on to that, Nasreen?
I would like to answer the question on how it works. So, and a bit of history. I love history because we don't have enough institution and memory, and then at some point we just feel like we are investing something new, and then no, we are just reinventing the wheel. So we keep coming with the same ideas without doing anything on the old ones. So the idea of the Youth Advisory Group actually started in the Youth Climate Action Summit in 2019, and it was a direct recommendation from young people to the Secretary General. And then the CAT team, which is the climate action team, took the job along with the Deputy Secretary General and opened a call for nomination for the Youth Advisory Group. The nominations came from different organizations around the world, and they chose the 7 representing the 7 region of the world according to the UN. And the idea was to, so our job, a lot of people think that we advise UN in general, but no, our advisor is exactly to the highest policy-making person in the UN, which is the Secretary General. So we used to meet with the Secretary General regularly every 3 months and give him our insights on the different topics. Also, we used to have general meetings regularly with the Deputy Secretary General and, of course, the CAT team, the Climate Action Team. And I mean, we pushed for certain things. For example, we started co-writing the Secretary General's speeches about climate change. And if you feel that the speech was a bit radical, it's us. And also how we address different topics. For example, a lot of conferences, we feel it's greenwashing and youth washing itself. So it uses climate change and youth, but they're not really into it. It's just in the face. So we also give our opinion. But the most important is we work as a bridge between the Secretary General and young people. So we had different consultations around the world with young people on how things should move and what UN can do. And the most important is we correct a lot of misinformation around UN and how they work, and around climate change and around the different processes. Thank you.
Thanks, Nasreen. I think the 2 of you made a really good point, and that you really frequently meet each other within the youth team. It can be every week. And then for people who are a bit more in the board member crew, like the Secretary General, you guys talk every 3 months. But there is a continuous talk and making sure that the discussion is accessible to all. And how do you bring up the voices that are usually unheard of and make sure that that dialogue is put into the Secretary General's agenda as well. And I feel like that connection, that clear connection in order to reflect the needs of the youth is there. And how do we implement that not only just within the UN level, but also G7, G20 as well. So perhaps, Axel, do you want to add very quickly on how do you think the Swedish methodology is working for you guys as youth?
Yes, I'll see if I am accurate in terms of what very quickly means, but I'll try. So in Sweden, my role as a youth delegate works this way, that I'm elected by a national youth council among nominees from several national youth organizations, and the youth council has a selection committee which selects the person who is most eligible for the role. And then before the COP, or even before preliminary meetings before the COP, I conduct consultations with the youth in Sweden to make sure that their positions have fed into what we will say. So after conducting those consultations, we come up with or a policy paper actually, to say that this is what Swedish youth are expecting, especially from the Swedish delegation, but also from other world leaders. So that's briefly how it works. But I would also like to echo what Jevonik said about the need for representation. And I think this consultation process is just one part of it. We're always striving to, do more, meet all groups that we can meet in Sweden, make sure that they are represented in the consultations we're making. Because how can I sit here and say that I represent all the youth of Sweden if I haven't actually met, all that diversity? And that's something I think we all should, strive for, making our institutions for youth involvement deliberately representative. So that fits into having a very clear and representative mandate. Is there more time, or should I?
I'm gonna cut you there.
Okay, I'll finish up
Sorry,
very
you
quickly.
can, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
no worries.
So a clear and representative mandate is important. Also, the autonomy for us as youth to kind of push our own priorities, decide what are the demands we will have, even if we might get support from non-youth or from the government or from companies or other institutions. And finally, that there should be a continuity in our involvement. We shouldn't just be involved when the decision is made and sit there silent. No, we should be involved in the preparation, in the decision-making room to voice our opinions, and in following it up to ensure accountability. That is true youth involvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Axel. I think you really made a good point in that we need a continuity in the discussion with the youth and a good representation, but a form of autonomy so that the youth can put up their agendas that they think is really important up to the global level. And I think we were actually, Aura and I, we were all talking about the importance of equal youth representation last night when we were having dinner. And I was wondering if you could touch upon that as well. You'll probably have to speak louder than that, so
Oh my God.
I will leave
I'll
in you.
try. Okay, luckily it's over. No, thank you for sharing your insights and how the system you have been part of work. Indeed, I think indeed you touch upon one of the main aspects. Can you hear me? Or yeah, those that have the translation, yes. Okay.
Oh, sorry, just one thing. So if you want to hear a bit more clearly, you can use the headphone set and listen at channel 0, and you can hear us very clearly instead of hearing the next door. So please feel free to put on your headphones if it's a bit hard to listen. Thank you. Sorry, go on.
All right. So yes, having been part of the G7 youth process, maybe I'll tell you a bit how it works, and then the lessons that I learned from that, and also from being involved in other youth engagement and participation processes. So the G7 youth process works that every year there is an organization which usually is an independent organization that usually doesn't have a budget. This organization every year, according to the rotating presidency of the G7, organize the youth consultations. Then every G7 nation has selected a delegation, and this is also usually run independently. In some nations, the delegates are also selected by the government, but again, we said independence is an important aspect, so I believe this maybe shouldn't always be the case. And then what we did, for example, with the Italian delegation is that we ran consultations in Italy through an online survey and also through a meeting where we invited all the youth associations in Italy, asking what demands we should put in the final communique. Then we had the consultations with the other delegates from the G7, and at the end we put together a final communique that we delivered to the, in my case, was the the German presidency in 2022, and so we deliver our demands to the head of states. So what I noticed and what I learned from that is that I think there are three main characteristics that a youth participation process should have. One is that it should be a long-term and structured process. We should avoid any kind of ad hoc involvement, which lasts only 1 year, one term, and there is no continuity in the process. And sometimes this is the case, the Youth 7. So what we see is that every time there are new delegates, every time there is a new organization, and maybe what was done the previous year is lost. So it kind of, the demands are lost. They are not more so meaningful. The second thing that I learned from being there is that also another important aspect is the availability of resources. So all of these activities, and I think also when we are here at COP in these youth engagement processes, we are doing this all at voluntary level. Of course, sometimes we are students, sometimes we are young professionals, But I mean, time is limited and we also need to sleep. So I think this is an important aspect to consider, like consider rewarding the participation of young people. And so these resources should, I think they should be both financial, like to allow the youth to be able to participate in summits, etc., so that they can have their own budget. But also they should be intellectual resourcing, meaning that youth should have the capacity to have their meaningful voice in the process they are involved. Otherwise, it's time lost. So I think these are a very important aspect. The third one I was going to touch upon is of course, the representation, which has already been discussed before. So having a representative body, this is also, I mean, not body, but having youth that are representing a broader audience is fundamental. So I think I'll stop here because I also want to leave the floor to other people.
Of course. No, thank you so much, everyone. I think you all really made a great point in terms of we need that youth representation body, which we can copy from the UN as well as the Nordic countries, making sure that there is a frequent meeting for the system, but also not so the system is only going on for 1 year. That can be 2 to 3 years time, and the participation of the youth should be respected in a sense that is provided financial support as well as resources as well. So I feel like all in all, these are systems that could be not necessarily implemented just in the UN as well as the local governments, but also in the private sector and schools. How do we make sure that things are youth-led, but they also hold accountability in terms of their actions? Because we have a lot of these youth talks, but also how do we make sure that things are followed up and measured in terms of the actions that were implemented? So I kind of wanted to ask the panelists, what do you think about that? Is this a critical discussion that we need to make sure we are able to measure and see the socio-political benefits, but how do we make sure to do that? So kind of wanted to open the floor if anyone wants to give an answer to that one.
Yes, you touched really good points. And I think indeed it's, I think this model, and I also would be curious then to discuss maybe with the UN advisory group, what could be improved in this existing model. But I think it would be great to see this replicated also at local level, at business level. I think there are great opportunities for really empower youth and use their potential. Going to your question, I think to make that happen, another important aspect is that there is a monitoring and reporting process of anything that we create. So if we create a youth advisory board, a youth council, whatever, I think it's important when this is structured to really identify how we will check that the youth demands will be integrated, will be really implemented, and that this is not just a listening or maybe, okay, let's give the floor to the youth to speak, but then we do nothing about it. So I think an important aspect is to really check and create these criteria for checking that the youth demands are implemented.
Awesome. Anyone else would like to give a comment on that as well? You're good? Oh.
I can just give a brief comment. So if I've heard anything about how youth have influenced this process, it's driving ambition. I've heard youth as kind of one of the main drivers of the Paris Agreement actually happening as, a critical part of civil society. I've heard the youth being mentioned for, always thinking of the larger picture rather than focusing on the climate crisis only, seeing that we have a parallel biodiversity loss, which is strongly interconnected. So really, I feel that that's something we as youth have brought up and are acknowledged for. How to measure that, I think it's hard, but maybe we'll measure it in 50 years to see if do we have a healthy planet left, or have we lost all biodiversity, even though we might have, kept some temperature goal. I don't know how to measure it.
Yeah, I want to talk about youth engagement in Japan. And this is my personal story. And I submit some public comments or policy recommendation to the Japanese government or ministries, but nothing has changed. And it was so disappointed, and we felt like it's not meaningless and we don't have to do that. That's a Japanese problem, I think. So we need like youth advisory system in Japan. And this is a platform we can regularly and directly and interactively talking with policymakers in Japan. So the future vision of youth advisory system is like youth engagement, and we can solve education problem, gender equality problem, and youth engagement issues. And could you show the picture of? Yeah, actually, in Japan, policy making process is done by old people. Old people. It's not all citizens in Japan, and this is a diet member of Japan. You can see the inequalities. Like there are few women in Japan, and the 25 to 40 age group is missing in diet members. So we should change this problem by establishing youth advisory system in Japan. And today we will make like policy recommendation opinion paper to the ministries and including Japanese Prime Minister. So we are passionate about this, and this is what I'm talking about in now. So
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you.
this about
Thank you so much. I think we do acknowledge the fact that, especially in Japan and in all of the East Asian contexts, we're an aging population. So what Akari is showing is the fact that most of these aging populations, what happens is that the people who are in power are usually people in their 50s, 60s, but they don't necessarily understand what the youth believe in terms of living alongside nature. How do we do it? What are the new methodologies? And how do we make sure that the youth voices are heard? But that's not necessarily because they don't want to understand. I think there is a miscommunication. So how do we close that gap and make sure that all of our agendas equally are addressed in a well manner? And I feel like the two of you, Javanik and Nisreen, you've been in the forefront with discussing with these policymakers who have their own agendas. But how have you been able to push forward with making sure that there is equal youth representation, but also make sure that the youth asks are implemented effectively? So if you guys could have a comment on that, that would be great.
It's not an easy thing. It is really hard for many reasons. One, the nature of humans, that they fear change. When the bicycles were invented the first time, everyone were against bicycles and the use of bicycles. When TV was there, everyone was against, and when electricity was there, everyone. And we know now we know that these things are very useful, but when it came first, everyone was so afraid of it. So I think this nature makes everyone fear change, and especially that this change that we are talking about is going to change everything. So it's not only a change in a policy or a change in personnel, because when you have a young population driving the policy making, driving the how things will be done, a lot of things will change, and I think people are afraid of that change. The second thing is power lobbying somehow. Some people are making use of the current situation to keep as it is, and they don't want it to change, because then if it change, it will disrupt their own interest. And this is also something we need to also very much consider and treat it with a huge pragmatism on how to move forward. I think the last but not least is the tools that we are using. The older generation, the policymakers, decision makers, understand tools differently than the young people do. So they are more into the written format tools, more into the policy briefs, like they like to do things formal way. While young people, they have energy, they have time, they have innovation, so they like to communicate things differently. So they like to draw, they like to song, the rap, for example, they like to rap about certain problems. And I think we need to find a common way of conversation and communicating, because if we can't communicate, we will not reach anywhere also.
Thank you so much. I think one last comment from Jovanik real quickly, and then we'll move on to the Q&A, because I see that we're 7 minutes more in until the finish of the seminar.
Yeah, no, I think just sort of a message of hope. The fact that now we're seeing the youth advisory system is being replicated elsewhere. So you have other UN agencies within the Eastern Caribbean, for example. You have even other private sector agencies are now exploring the youth advisory system. It's a good way. But I think what is key is that we always, as young people, we always be able to show the sort of benefit of integrating youth. And I think that goes to the point of how do we influence policy. It is important that we do not just skip the narrative of the issue, but what would be the benefit? How would that translate into improving the overall socioeconomic situation of the country? Because, you know, that's what politicians care about, whether it be from the business standpoint, how it could improve. I think once you can push a positive narrative, then that sets us off on a better footing.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, I think I'll now open the floor to one question. So whoever has a burning question, please raise your hand and we'll give the mic to you. No? Okay, I think we have a pretty shy crew. In that case, okay, perfect.
Having no questions, it's either we did so good or we did so bad. So you need to choose.
Hi, everyone. So it was a great session over here. Great understanding being developed by all the panelists speaking about youth, their role to the climate aspect. My name is Ankit. I'm from India. I represent Indian Youth Climate Network. It's a non-profit organization. So we basically are into more youth development, capacity building, awareness sessions. From all your aspects, like about climate education, you all talked about and things. So how difficult it is, like when you talk about climate education on the fields, basically on the rural areas, if you talk about how difficult it becomes to handle them, because the primary thought perspective is not about learning climate education, if I'm right. Like it's happening in Southern Asia part. So how it becomes easier, or what perspective you all want to share, like so that it becomes easier for us to convey the message that, like, yeah, climate is changing and it's important for you also to understand. And even like the policy part where you talked about. So like, yeah, means youth advisory body is one of the thing like that can be formed. But do you think like it's more important, like the main government bodies should have an understanding where we want to picture it, like where we want to send the message to it? So yeah, means if you all can share some aspects for these two, but yeah, remarks. Thanks. Thank you.
I have a very simple answer for that. So a lot of times people ask me, Nisreen, what is the best way for young people to push the policymakers and the decision makers to do things? And I answer by the best way young people can push the policymakers or the decision makers to do things is by being the policymakers and the decision makers. So I'm really encouraging a lot of young people now to join politics, or at least to be a technocrat in your government, where you can be the policymaker and the decision maker instead of just pushing the other generations to do it.
Thank you. Sorry, I just have one other question from online. You can ask your question later. Sorry about that. A lady from Ms. Nakagaki from Japan is asking, we're talking about reskilling the adults who are older than us. And she is asking what kind of advice would you suggest to the adults who need to reskill, and how will we support that in that initiative? So if you have any comments on that. Maybe Giovanna can answer that, or Nisreen.
Yeah, so I think one crucial step is to recognize other forms of education than just formal education, because I mean, you can learn wherever you are in life, and you can go, training through your work. You can be involved in civil society and learn there. You can just learn through your day-to-day work and really recognize the learning that happens there, making sure that it's an environment that actually works for learning, that it's encouraged to continuously ask curious questions. I think that's one crucial step, just making the places that you are in your career conducive to learning.
Yes, so I just wanted to add something also to the previous question, but about reskilling older people. Also, I think it's important to understand the context and okay, where are we? Where are they? What are they doing now? And what are the opportunities that are there for these people in that specific area? And I think sometimes we need to be very creative and innovative to seek not only to seek for opportunities out of things that we consider really bad. And I was talking with you yesterday about an example very quickly. This summer, I was in south of Italy in a rural area, and someone was telling me how they reinvented their business because they were growing olive trees, and these olive trees were on a hill. And but now it's not. It became too hard to grow them because now using machines is cheaper, and machine could not go through these very steep hills. So they decided to find an opportunity, and instead of producing olive oil, that was their main activity, they started to grow animals, to feed animals, as in particular pigs, with the olive from the trees. So I think it's also about finding opportunities. I'll stop here. Maybe I'll get back to your question in person.
Thank you so much. I think you made a really good point towards the end that you need to find innovation in the hardest times as well. And how do you do that? We have to bring more flexibility in the system, but also the voices. And that is one method to bring the youth towards this agenda and have them represent in a current system, for example, in the Department of Environment, Econ, and everything, not just create a department for youth, but put every youth in that existing system. So I want to ask everyone to make their 30-second message, last minute remarks, and we'll end the session. So I think we'll start from the other side, from Javanik, and I'll be timing you. So
Yes, I see it's 10 seconds. So
Yeah.
simple, make climate education fun and non-conventional. I think that is an approach for the modern era.
thank you, Nasreen.
I will say make it inclusive, not only education, but just make the information accessible.
1, transformative change needs transformative education. 2, we youth are the leaders of today, not only tomorrow.
So we should establish youth advisory system in Japan to make our voices heard, to make changes to our inequality regarding youth engagement and gender inequalities. Thank you.
My statement is find the opportunities and be disruptive. I think we need that to accelerate action. And this can be in the field of climate education through finding innovative ways, and also through involving youth, for example, through the Youth Advisory Council.
All right, thank you, everyone. You guys are right on time. I think we're a bit over, but that's all right. But yeah, no, thank you so much, all. I think we've had a really good discussion amongst youth, but one person that is lacking in the sphere are the adults who are currently making that decision-making process. And I see that there are many people here who will be able to make that change with us. So I hope you guys can say hello and goodbye to many of the people who are at the Japan Pavilion, but also outside. And I want to end this seminar by also stating that one thing is to really transform the climate education system, but also make it accessible for everyone. and starting from the children, but also teachers who need to be taught as to what is climate change and how can their children, their students, be the change makers themselves. And secondly, once that is available, how do you make sure that there is a equal youth representation within schools, but also local districts and the private sector, so that those voices and the capacity building doesn't go to waste, but it's also being brought into the sphere that really needs to be changed. And that equal representation we discussed all in all, you guys all brought up the points that it has to be disruptive and non-conventional, but fun, because we all just want to have fun and, you know, have a living that's quite exciting. And if we all have smiles on our faces, I'm sure many people will actually want to join. So I hope we can, you know, turn this initiative into something, starting from this Japan Pavilion. We can ask the Japanese government to also participate in this dialogue to bring the change, especially through the G7.